going to go through this Godot Space Shooter tutorial. I'm going to go quite quickly, so you will need to pause the video if you're following along. First, I'm going to download the project from the web page. Now the project is a zip file, so Windows opens it in this window. It can't be used while it's inside the zip file because the files can't be modified, so we have to take the files from inside the zip file and drag them somewhere else. So I'm going to put them there. Now I'm going to load Godot, which I've installed to my desktop. And I'm going to import the project that I just unzipped. It might take a couple of minutes for Godot to import the project, so just be patient. So we're back in Godot. I'll quickly go over what you can see. Top left, you have the scene tree. This lists all of the nodes in your current scene. Bottom left, you have a file system. This lists all of the files in the project folder on the disk. On the right, you have the inspector. That lets you edit properties of the nodes that you select. And in the middle, you have the main window, which can either show you a 2D view of the current scene, or it can show, if you click script, it can show you the script files that you're editing. And if you have a small screen, you can make it bigger by clicking on that. The project includes some code already written for you. If you double click on player.dd, you can see this script controls the player. The process function is called every frame, and there are three possibilities here. Either the player has pressed the left arrow or the right arrow or the fire button. If they've pressed left or right, then we rotate and we multiply the amount of rotation by the amount of time that's passed this frame. And if they've pressed the fire button, then we create a new bullet node from the bullet scene and initialize it. We take a vector pointing to the right and we rotate it by whatever the current rotation of the sprite is, and we scale that vector by the velocity, how fast it's moving, and then we take that and we add it to the position vector, and that moves the sprite to the appropriate position. We click the run button or press the F5 key. If you get a window pop up there, then just tick all the boxes and press allow. Now we can see our game window here, and as I said, move left, move right. You've got a player ship, you've got an enemy ship. The ships have got light maps applied to them, so the light reflects off the ship, and you can shoot. There are three variables at the top here. Turning is how quickly the player turns. If we adjust that, it could turn faster. and velocity is how fast the player moves. But these variables are exported variables, which means we don't have to modify them here. We can modify them in the property inspector. So if I find our player node, the script attached, click on it, and go to the inspector, those three exported variables are shown up there. So I'm going to give the player some velocity. Now when I play the game, you can see the player quickly moves. We want to see where the player's gone, so we want the camera to track the player. So at the moment we don't have a camera. I'm going to right click on the player, I'm going to add child node, and I'm going to search for a camera 2D. Create. Now I've got camera 2D selected, go to the node inspector, and the most important one is to tick current, that makes it work. And I'm also going to change the zoom to zoom the camera out. And I'm going to change the drag margin so that the camera keeps the player in the center of the screen at all times. Now you can see the screen scrolls as the player moves. Behind the player you can see we already have a background of stars that scroll, and that's already been created for you here in Parallax background. But I want to add another layer of stars, so I'm going to right click on Parallax background, add child, and this time I want Parallax layer. Now I have a file prepared which is a background of big stars. So I want to make a sprite, and the easiest way to do that is to select the parent node there and then just drag in the stars to there, and then that creates a sprite node containing the stars there. Now I want the stars to wrap around, so I need to set up motion mirroring. So go to the property inspector of the parallax layer and mirroring, and this is just the size of my bitmap multiplied by 15, because I'm going to be zooming it by 15. So then I click on my bitmap sprite, and I'm going to position it. And I'm going to scale it, make it bigger. Now if we run the game, we should see that there are now small stars that move slowly and big stars that move more quickly. To add a particle effect to the player. Luckily, this effect has already been provided, it's just not been turned on. It's in the child node of the player, CPU particles 2D. So we click on that, and if we click emitting, that turns it on, and we can see there's now a particle effect. Now you want to play with the parameters of this a bit. So for instance, I would change the amount to 50. Don't say it's too high, you might crash the game if your computer can't handle it. There's a lot of other options here that you can play with. So you could change the spread. You could change the velocity of how fast they come out. But I'll leave that up to you. Next, we want to make the enemy move. So the enemy has its own scene file called enemy.tscn. We double click that to open it and see the enemy. And I'm going to right click on the root node. I'm going to attach a script to it. I'm just going to accept the defaults. And I'm going to delete what's in there. And I'm going to replace it with the code from the tutorial. So this is, like all of the objects in this game, the enemy is an area 2D, which is used to detect collisions. These are similar to the player parameters. Each frame process is called, which gets the direction of the player from the enemy, and it calls a function to rotate the enemy towards that direction so that it rotates towards the player, and it updates the position in the same way as the player. If the enemy moves too far away from the player, then we call Q3, which deletes the enemy, because otherwise we would get too many enemies that were hanging around off the edge of the screen. And finally, we have a random function. If the random function is below fire rate, then we create a new bullet. If we run the project, we should find that the enemy is following our player and shooting bullets. But the bullets are not moving. Now, the bullets, there are two different kinds of bullets. They're in two different scenes. There's a player bullet there, and there is an enemy bullet. Now, both of these scenes have scripts attached. See my script icon. And in fact, they're both using the same script. So we click on that icon, and it takes us to the script, which is bullet.gd. You can also find it, double click on it there. The script at the moment has an init function, which we use to set up the position and rotation, and a ready function that plays the sound effect, but it doesn't have a process function, so it's not doing anything frame to frame. So I'm going to add in the process function from the tutorial. And this process function is pretty much exactly the same as the enemy. It moves, and if it goes too far away, it is deleted. Let's try that. So, yep, we got lots of bullets, and we can shoot. But they aren't hitting anything because we haven't done collision detection for the bullets. Enemy bullet. Double click that, and then I'm going to click on the bullet node there, which is an area 2D. Now, nodes in Godot can send and receive signals to other nodes, and area 2D, if we click on node, you can see a list of all the signals, and area 2D can receive this signal, which is area entered, and that tells us that another area 2D has collided with this one. So I'm going to double click that signal, and it asks what script I want to connect it to. So I'm going to accept the default, which is the bullet script there, and default name, which is on bullet area entered, and I'm going to press connect. And Godot has now written a function for me, and this function will be called every time something collides with this bullet. So at the moment it contains pass, which does nothing, so I'm just going to replace that with what I want it to do, and I want it to disappear, be deleted. So I'm going to do Q3. Save that by pressing Ctrl S, and then I'm going to repeat the same steps for the player bullet. So I need to find the player bullet scene. I've already got it open, but if you haven't, double click it there. It opens there. Switch to 2D. If we take a look, zoom in a bit, you can see that is the player bullet there. If I go to signals, find the area entered signal again, double click it. Again, I'm going to connect it to bullet, and this time it doesn't make a function because it's connected to the same script. So this script is already done. It's going to do Q3. It's going to be the same for the enemy bullet and the player bullet because they're both connected to the bullet script. Now the bullets should disappear when they hit something. We've done collisions with the player's bullets and the enemy's bullets. Next we need to make the enemy collide. So it's a similar process. The enemy's in its own scene, so I'm going to go into the enemy scene. I'm going to click on the enemy node. I'm going to go to the list of signals, and I'm going to connect an area entered signal. I'm going to connect it to the enemy script. Copy and paste in my function. This one's a bit longer, so this one does an explosion effect, particle effect, fades out the enemy sprite, it removes the collision detection polygon, it increases the player's score, it waits 1 second, and then it deletes the enemy. I'm going to save that. And next I'm going to do a similar thing for the player. So now the player's not in his own scene. The player is in the main scene. Yes. I find him there, but it's a similar process. Player is an area 2D, therefore he has an area entered signal. Double click it, and I'm going to connect it to the player script. I'm going to copy and paste in my own function there. So this function, so the player doesn't die immediately, he loses 1 health point, and then if his health runs out, then we reload the game. We've also got a little special effect, so it's a modulate property which we can use to change the colour of the player when he gets hit, and we've got a sound effect which we play. So now the enemies and the player can shoot each other. Where's that guy? Come here. Yeah. At the moment we're using keys to control the player. If you've got a gamepad, or if one of your friends got a gamepad, you might prefer to use a gamepad. So I'm going to open the player.gd script, which we're already in. You can see there's this empty function that I've already provided called gamepad. At the moment it does absolutely nothing, it passes. Now I'm going to replace this script, this function, some more code, I'm going to create a variable for a virtual joystick, which is going to be a vector, which is not pointing anywhere. And then I am going to get the x-axis and the y-axis of the joystick. I'm going to test to make sure that I'm going to make a vector out of those and make sure that the vector is not within the dead zone of the joystick. And if so, then we'll calculate the angle of the vector and then rotate the player towards the angle that was pressed. Now the reason for this virtual stick is because you might also want your game to work on mobile devices with touchscreens. So I'm going to add another variable and another function. I'm going to copy and paste. So this function is called underscore input, and it gets called whenever there is an input event. And in this case, we're getting touchscreen input events. So we test and we see what kind of event we've got. Basically, if the player presses on the left half of the screen, then the thumb becomes a virtual joystick, and if the player presses on the right half of the screen, then the thumb becomes a fire button. And we can test this even if we haven't got a touchscreen by using the mouse. So if I press the mouse on the right, it fires, and if I drag the mouse around the left, I can change the direction it's going in. We're going to make a new type of enemy. So we currently have an enemy scene, and I am just going to duplicate that scene. I could make an enemy from scratch, but a lot of it's going to be the same, so it's easier to duplicate the existing one. I'm going to call it cool enemy. Okay, I'm going to double click on cool enemy. That opens it. I'm going to press 2D to view it. And we can see at the moment it's exactly the same as the first enemy. So this is the sprite that contains the texture that determines what the enemy looks like. So if I want to change that, there's a few ways of doing that. I could drag in a different sprite, a different texture. So ships. Let's say I want a cargo ship. I mean, I could drag it into there. That'd be one way. Or I could completely delete that node, click on the root node, and drag in the new graphic to there. And that just creates a new sprite, cargo ship. In either case, these sprites also got normal maps for the lighting. So I'm going to drag in the appropriate normal map to there. Okay, now you can probably see there's an outline around the ship, collision polygon, and that determines how the ship collides with other Area 2D sprites. And at the moment it's the wrong shape for our new ship, so I'm just going to delete that as well. Now I'm going to click on the cargo ship sprite, and you can see with the sprite selected, there's a new menu appeared there, sprite. So click on that, create a collision polygon 2D sibling. And I can change how accurate it is, but that's fine. So I'm going to press create collision polygon, and now I've got a collision polygon that is the exact shape of my ship. And you can see it's a sibling because it's appeared next to the sprite as children of the enemy area 2D. Press Control S to save my scene. And I'm going to go back to the main scene, which I've already got open there. Now I want to add my new enemy to the main scene. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. First of all, I want it to go into this enemies subnode to keep them all together. So I click on that. And then one way is to find the enemy scene that I just created, call enemy, and drag it into there, and it appears there. The other way of doing it is to click on enemies and press instance child scene. This gives me a list of all the scenes that are available, and you can see my cool enemy scene, same one I dragged in. Click on that, and that has put it up there. Zoom in, and again I can position it where I like. Now, if we test our game, we have 5 enemies, but that is not a lot. So rather than spending our time adding hundreds more enemies manually, we're going to create a node that automatically creates enemy nodes for us. So I'm going to get rid of those enemies because we won't need them anymore. I'm going to delete. I did a click and a shift click to select them, and then a right click to delete them. Okay, now I'm still gonna. This thing's going to be called an enemy spawner, and it's going to go in the same place the enemies did. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to add child node, and this time I'm going to add a timer. Now, a timer is a node that doesn't run every frame, it only runs at a certain time interval. So that, and I am going to rename that enemy spawner. Now you can see over here I've got a wait time of 1 second, so this will create enemies every 1 second. You can change that if you want. We need to set the auto start on, and we need to add a script. So notice this node is actually going to be invisible. It's going to have a script, but we can't actually see it anywhere in the scene. So create a script. I'm going to delete and paste in my script. Now you can see I've written a function on enemy spawner timeout. So this is the function that actually creates the enemies. It's at the moment it's not going to get called because I need to attach a signal. So I'm just going to save that script, and then I'm going to click enemy spawner, go to the node, and you can see it's only got one signal timer, and it's timeout. So I'm going to connect it, and I want it to connect to enemy spawner itself. So I'm going to connect, and you can see there's a little green arrow appeared there. That just means that function is now connected to a signal, and so every 1 second that function Right, now we've exported these variables up the top. We've got the minimum score if you don't want the enemies to appear until the score gets to a certain number. We've got the maximum score, we've got how many enemies, the maximum number of enemies to have, and we've got this one doesn't have a default. This is the kind of enemy that we are going to spawn. So we need to set that one to something. So I'm going to save, and I'm going to go back to my enemy spawner, inspector. You can see these I can change, and that one is empty. So now I need to find an enemy scene, because it's a packed scene. So if I want my enemy that I made, the cool enemy scene, I drag that into there. I should find that enemies keep appearing. Now, if I have different kinds of enemies, I can have more than one enemy spawner. So I can take that spawner I made, I can duplicate it, and the second spawner could have a different kind of enemy. Now I want the enemies to spawn in random positions, so I'm just going to edit my enemy script, and I'm going to add another function to this script. Copy. This function is called _ready. It gets called once when the enemy is added to the scene, and it just changes the position of the enemy to be a random position at a set distance away from the player. So now all of our enemies will appear at random positions just off the edge of the screen. Now finally we have a laser. If we go to our file system, the laser has already been created for you. It's in a scene there. We can't see it because by default it's invisible. If we just click there, it shows you what it looks like. I'm going to keep it invisible by default. And I'm going to go to our main scene. I'm going to find player, and I want to add the laser to player. So I could do it by dragging. I'm going to do it by instance child scene laser. Okay, so if I just toggle it on, you can see where if it's not in the right place, then you might need to move it around. You need to untick that before you could move it around, but it is in the right place, so I'll hide it again. I'm going to attach the script to the laser. Paste in my script, and this is a charge laser, so it has two states, charging and discharging. If you hold down the fire button, it charges, and if you let go of the fire button, it discharges, and if it has some charge left, then it shows the laser, and it turns on the collisions with monitorable equals true, and if not, it hides the laser and it turns off the collisions with monitorable equals false. And we clamp the charge to be between 0 and 3, so it can't go less than 0, it can't go more than 3. And we're showing the charge on the heads-up display there, which is down here, so you can see charge charge, it's the green bar that's already been added for you there. And while I'm here, I'm going to turn on the lights again. And if I hold down spacebar, bar builds, and then I let go, and I've got a laser.